On a scale of 1 to 10, how much of a success do you consider Sean O'Malley's UFC career to have been so far? Now, I understand that this is a question that can be interpreted in a few different ways. In terms of his star power, O'Malley has done better than most in his position. In fact, I don't think it's a stretch to say that he is among the most recognizable faces in the game, an athlete who has used his various platforms and marketing skills to build a connection with an audience that extends far beyond the realms of mixed martial arts. Sean O'Malley is a legitimate star for the promotion, but he hasn't just gotten there on the merits of his results. Indeed, his incredibly attractive fighting style plays into his whole magnetism, and I'd argue that the intrigue over his upper bound limits is still very much there. For me, I do struggle to place his potential, especially when compared to guys who occupy similar positions within the sport. But what's different about O'Malley is that he has been frozen in this state of being a prospect for about 5 years now, and as much as people like to look at his lowest moments and point to them as proof that he is a hype job, I just don't see the speed bumps he has encountered as the type of definitive answers that we should have at this stage, one way or another. Look at someone like Max Holloway. As the competition level increased, he steadily began to answer question after question, dominating Cub Swanson, beating Jeremy Stevens, Ricardo Lamas, Anthony Pettis, and then eventually, by the time his matchup against Jose Aldo came, we were familiar enough with him because of his rise to give him a real shot against the great featherweight champion. Just like when Darren Till got his bell rung before being finished by both Tyron Woodley and Jorge Masvidal, that was a definitive answer to where he stood in terms of his progression, where he needed to improve, something that took away a huge amount of the mystique that surrounded him. And a lot of the time, the progress of a promising new contender is halted even earlier. Just look at Sean Strickland. Sure, we'd seen him lose before, but as he was picking up some real steam in the middleweight division, in stepped Alex Pereira, who KO'd him stiff. When it comes to Sean O'Malley, it's all mystique. I just don't have any real conclusive data to go off of. Indeed, he is known to be a little fragile, known to be somewhat susceptible to leg kicks, but to me he still seems like an unknown commodity, one who has been stuck in his prospect form for about 5 years now. There was some real momentum behind O'Malley after his Contender Series knockout, before he then doubled down on that hype by showing us more of his tricks in his UFC debut against Terrion Ware, but then a dominant and in many ways beautiful striking performance against Andre Sukumthot left O'Malley with a pretty gruesome looking foot injury that ruled him out at what was a critical time for his rise. Then, just as he healed up, there was the USADA suspension that derailed any hopes of a return as he popped for traces of Ostarine. And of course, who knows what actually happened there, it's not really relevant. But once those 6 months had actually been served and he was set to return to the cage, this time being booked for a fight against his future rival Marlon Vera, all of a sudden, what we were told were residual traces from that very same positive test for Ostarine managed to get Sugar Sean suspended for another 6 months. A grand total of 2 years later, O'Malley returned to the octagon, looking better than ever, showing levels of striking that his fans and even some of his haters were pretty impressed by. Back-to-back knockouts of, middling opposition in Jose Alberto Quinones and the veteran Eddie Wineland proved that Sugar Sean was ready for a step up in competition. At this stage, it was just over 3 years since his Contender Series viral knockout, but all things considered, we were getting somewhere. And then the Marlon Vera fight happened, and though the Ecuador native should be given full credit for the win because of his use of calf kicks, the nature of the defeat still left me feeling like we didn't know too much about Sean O'Malley or where he was at. On a quick side note, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to let us know in the comment section below. Also, while you're at it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if the mood strikes, why not cap it off by liking the video as well? Anyway, back to the video. To Sean O'Malley's credit, he persevered, looking excellent once again with 3 straight knockout victories. Not over the elite of the elite, but decent competition for the most part. He then firmly inserted his name into the rankings with a victory over Raulian Paiva that really seemed to signal once again that the Sugar Show was finally headed for a top 10 fight. And the UFC sensed this as well, setting him up for a bout against the underrated, hard-nosed, and I don't want to say gatekeeper, but I guess I already did, number 9 ranked Pedro Munoz. Finally, O'Malley was picking up some steam. Indeed, Munoz is an excellent leg kicker, but for me, that was the perfect test for Sean at this point in time, because having a perceived weakness to leg kicks, especially in the modern game, that's a pretty tough path. But in the end, it wasn't to be either man's day, and an eye poke ended the fight prematurely. And while you can dive into the first round we actually got and discuss who won it on the scorecards, and whether all of the leg kicks or some of the leg kicks or enough of the leg kicks were checked, yada yada yada, let's just agree on the fact that it wasn't a fight that presented any real results. Now we're coming up on 5 years into Sean O'Malley's UFC career, and to make his incredibly strange rise even stranger, the UFC decided to book him to take on the #1 ranked former champion Petr Yan in a fight that will serve as the ultimate litmus test for a fighter who isn't even in the top 10, a fighter who the promotion had been very cautiously matchmaking up until this point. And I gotta say, if both O'Malley himself and the UFC are as frustrated as I am with the lack of real answers when it comes to this dude's ceiling or even his current ability, they could have and maybe should have gone with someone like Rob Font or even Corey Sandhagen. But no, O'Malley wanted Petr Yan, perhaps the single greatest striker in the division. I'd argue he's one of the best 5 in the sport. As much as it came totally out of the blue, as much as it seems reckless from a promotional standpoint when trying to manage the progression of a real bankable future star, I kind of love it. This isn't like Khamzat Chimaev getting a fight with Leon Edwards. That was a matchmaking move that lined up perfectly with the narrative that Borz had built around himself through his insanely quick rise. No, this to me seemed like O'Malley, in his 5th year as a UFC fighter at the age of 27, is telling himself, the UFC, and anyone else who cares to read between the lines, that he firmly believes that he is better than his record suggests, better than the level of competition he has been set up against, no matter what the results were, and that he can in many ways, in his own special way, appreciate how freakish his UFC career has been. And using the star power he built as leverage, he is betting on himself in a pretty big way. And yeah, I love it. I think a more cautious approach might have served him better, because Petr Yan is a killer, but I respect it, and I actually think it's kind of understandable. I am backing Petr Yan to win, but I suppose the point here is that, despite having been talking about him for 5 years now, I honestly have no idea how good Sean O'Malley is. But what do you make of Sean O'Malley's career as a whole, and how do you think he fares in a 3-round battle against the formidable former champion, Petr Yan? Do let us know in the comment section below, and if you want to like the video and subscribe to the channel, that would be awesome. As always, thank you for watching.